In episode 5, it doesn't take long for Missy to start going through withdrawal, and Katie starts taking care of her. She tells her when she first arrived there was another girl in the room named Hillary, but Hillary got pregnant, and whoever kidnapped them didn't like that, so one night, Katie woke up and Hillary was gone. She also lets Missy know that night is poker night, and he's not going to come for them. Instead, he's just going to chain them up and put rags in their mouths so no one can hear them scream. The rest of the neighborhood, though, is dealing with a power outage because Mrs. Carroll drove into a power line and unfortunately, she died. But it knocked the power out in the entire neighborhood. Most families in the neighborhood start looking for candles and flashlights in their house, and one of those families is Lori's. And as she's directing her daughter where to go, she overhears a conversation between her husband, John, and their son. And John is telling Ryan, don't tell anybody. It's our secret, okay? And while Lori is curious, she doesn't interject. Over with Mare and her family, Frank comes over with a bunch of flashlights. But because there's nothing to do, Frank and Siobhan start having a conversation about how Frank's engagement's going. And it's not going great since the allegations. He then flips it to Siobhan, though, because the family's never really talked about Kevin's death and dealing with it. Siobhan reassures Frank that she's fine, and then tells Frank that she's met somebody, that person being Anne. And as that conversation is going on downstairs, Mare is looking for something in Siobhan's room when she comes across the laptop that has Siobhan's school project featuring home movies of Kevin. And Mare watches one from Kevin's birthday, and it breaks her heart. The next day, she goes to a therapy session but doesn't bring up the home movies, instead talking about the history in her family with mental illness. Turns out her father actually committed suicide when she was 13, and it made her feel like she wasn't good enough for her dad. Mare is also seriously concerned with mental health being passed down from generation to generation. And what happened to her dad and what happened to Kevin could possibly happen to Drew. Therapy session ends, and later that night, Mare's family heads over to Lori's place. And they even brought Anne. Anne and Siobhan head upstairs to help Moira get dressed up because Moira's got prom coming up. Downstairs, the adults talk about Mrs. Carroll dying, but all Lori can focus on is her son, who seems to be in a depressed state. She gets snapped out of it, though, when they do bring up Moira going to the prom and how excited she is. Moira has Down syndrome, so going to the prom is a huge deal, and they've taken big efforts to make it a big night for her. She's really excited. John then asks Mare if she's heard the big news, and the big news is the fact that John and Lori went to go visit Kenny in prison, where Kenny asked them if they would take care of DJ. They said they would think about it, and Kenny still has to ask the lawyer, but they would technically be next of kin. Mare then asks John, do you think Kenny ever hit her? And he says, we suspected things weren't great, but Erin was tough. She was like her mom. Her mom didn't let anyone know she had leukemia until she was going into hospice. Erin was a lot like that. Lori cuts in and says, we all know Kenny wasn't treating her right, and John agrees, saying, well, that's why we all took care of her. And Lori points out that Erin even lived with Billy for a while. And that's something that Mare didn't know. So she starts asking Billy, well, why did Erin live with you? And Billy tells her that it was shortly after Erin's mom died. Kenny was drinking a lot. Nobody wanted Erin around that, so she moved in. But when the question comes up of how long she stayed, Billy doesn't really have a concrete answer for it. And he's visibly getting more and more fidgety, to the point where he actually gets up and says, I have to go to a fundraiser, leaving a full beer that he just got from the fridge, which definitely piques Mare's interest. Now, while Mare and Lori's family were hanging out on the other side of town, Dylan has just arrived home, and he's on the front porch with Bianca. Bianca can't really understand why Dylan would want to keep DJ after finding out that DJ wasn't his. And he does admit, yeah, it's a little weird. She then tells Dylan, if you ever want to talk about what happened that night with Erin's father, you can. I'm here for you. But he kind of gets a little defensive, saying, I've got friends, indicating I don't really need you. And when he says that, she also gets defensive, saying, I woke up that night and you weren't in bed. When I went downstairs, you weren't downstairs. You weren't outside smoking. So where were you, Dylan? And that's when he looks at her and says, you should probably leave. And when she doesn't jump to it right then and there, he yells at her saying, get the fuck out. And Bianca takes off. The next day, Mare continues to dive into the case that she's not supposed to be working on, meeting with a former contact who is a kind of den mother for prostitutes on the street. She explains to the woman that 2 more girls have gone missing and 1 has died. So she wants to know if there's any weird guys that have been trying to pick up the girls on the street. The contact tells her that she'll put the word out if anything weird's gone down and let Mare know. But these two met for lunch, my favorite subject in school. And over at school, Moira is getting lunch, walking through the cafeteria with her tray of food, when a couple of bullies start picking on her, actually throwing food at her and calling her names. And while I never usually interject with my opinion, I just want to state, I went to high school in Philadelphia. There was actually a school of special needs kids within our high school, and we loved them, which made that scene really frustrating. And it must have been frustrating for her brother. Not only is he keeping a secret, but now he's watching these bullies throw food and call his sister names. And he's had enough. So he grabs his plastic food tray and beats the hell out of the kid, which forces Lori to come pick him up from school. And instead of just taking the kid for ice cream right away and giving him a medal and a pat on the back, she questions why he was acting out. It's obvious to her that something's going on with her son, and that's when she brings up the secret he's been keeping, asking him, is your dad doing it again? And that's when Ryan takes off running into the park. She goes after him, and Lori continues to question him, and that's when you find out that the thing that John is doing is cheating on Lori, and not only is he doing it, he's doing it with the same girl. Ryan must have seen it go down, and John has sworn him to secrecy about the issue, and it's been eating at him since. But once again, good on Ryan for beating the hell out of those kids. When Lori and Ryan get home that night, Lori confronts John about it, and John says to Ryan, hey, it's all my fault. I'm gonna fix this. But Ryan's pretty despondent, not responding to anything John has to say. The next day is the wake of Mrs. Carroll. A lot of neighbors head to the Carroll residence to pay their respects, including Mare and her mom. But that's when Mr. Carroll stands up and says, I can't live with the guilt anymore. I had an affair with Helen Sheehan, Mare's mom. And the whole place stops what they're doing and stares at Mare's mom. And on the drive home, Mare is dying laughing at the fact that her mom carried on an affair with this guy and she was the other woman. That night, though, is the big date. And who will she choose? When the door opens up, Mare has decided to go out with Colin. On the ride over, she starts questioning Colin about the case, asking if they've looked into anybody that messaged Aaron's account. And Colin says, yeah, we questioned 3 people, but they all had alibis. Colin, though, doesn't want to talk about work. He wants this to be a date. Mare, though, has other plans. He tries to make small talk during dinner, but she keeps bringing it back to the case. Mare remembered there was a girl a couple years ago from Millville, New Jersey, who had a story similar to Missy and Katie's story. She gives Colin the name of a detective in Millville and says, call him, ask him about the case. But at this point, it's become apparent to Colin that this isn't a date, so he says, why didn't you tell me that you went to Deacon Mark's previous parish and questioned the pastor? And she tells him the reason is because the pastor didn't have anything new. But Colin's pissed because when he showed up, he looked like an idiot. He also feels like an idiot because his mother told him that the only reason that she was going out with him that night was because she wanted to stay close to the case. And when he says that, that's the end of the date. Mare gets up, thanks him, and leaves. That night, Dylan and his buddy go and pick up Jess at her place. Jess tells Dylan that she told Mare about the journals being in a previous hiding place. And when Mare asked about a necklace, Jess told her she didn't know anything about it. Jess then gives in to peer pressure and smoked weed. The trio head over to Aaron's house and start looking for the journals. Doesn't take long for them to find them. And as Dylan is taking all the journals out, he starts handing the journals to Jess and the Wiz Khalifa wannabe. And that's when he finds an envelope marked DJ's ear surgery money, and it's filled with cash. So, of course, he pockets that. When he turns around, Jess is flipping through the journal and he says, hey, let's go. We said we weren't going to read them. And there is stuff written in there about Deacon Mark. They take the journals back to Dylan's place and start burning them, but Jess can't help herself. She continues to read them. And one particular page catches Jess's interest, so she pockets that and burns the final diary. But the word about why Deacon Mark was transferred to his parish has gotten out. And as Deacon Mark is picking up some pizza from a restaurant, a couple of kids see him and start chasing after him, beating the hell out of him. When he gets back to the parish, he's really upset, and Hastings is trying to find out what happened. He says to Mark, we gotta call the police, but he says no, because I was with Erin the night she was killed. She called and was upset, and I went and picked her up. I put her bike in my trunk, and I was gonna take her home, but then she got a message from someone asking her to show up at Brandywine Park. I tried to convince her to go home, but she was hysterical, so I dropped her off. Hastings asks him, why didn't you tell the cops? But Mark says, probably because I had a previous accusation against me. I have her bike in my trunk. I was scared, so I took the bike and I threw it in the river. Hastings then has to ask the uncomfortable question, did you kill her? And Mark says, well, if I said no, would you even believe me? The next night, Mare is driving home at night when she sees the Prowler. Same Prowler that Mrs. Carroll described, same Prowler that she saw previously. But this time, she chases after him. And he runs into a house where Mare grabs him and slams him down, and it turns out it's not a Prowler at all, it's a neighbor with dementia. So the paramedics get called, as do the cops, and the chief shows up. And the chief lays into Mare about continuing to harp on this case. But Mare can't help herself. The next day, she's scheduled to go with Colin and interview some of the prostitutes because her contact has gotten back to her. There has indeed been a creepy guy around. And Zabel's mom questions whether it's a good idea for Colin to be hanging out with Mare because she's technically off the case. She warns him to be careful, and he says, my whole life's been careful. Look where that's gotten me. So he gets in the car, and they head off to the diner and meet a couple of prostitutes that let them know that there was a guy who was pretty creepy. He picked up one of the girls one day, and she got ready to, do her job. And that's when all of a sudden he choked her. And she was able to escape by just fighting him off. She lets both of them know that he was driving a blue conversion van, and she got some of the license plate. So they run the plates, but they have to wait about 2 hours for the results, so they both head to the river to have an awkward conversation about the date. She tells him, "My life's a shit show, Zabel. I can't do everything you want." He fires back, "How the hell do you know what I want?" But she starts going through all the baggage she has and says, "You're right, I don't know what you want, but I'm sure you don't want all of this baggage." She starts talking about how he knows what it's like when you just get obsessed with a case. And that's when he says, "I didn't solve that case with the missing girl." It turns out the missing girl's parents had hired a private investigator because the police weren't working fast enough. He had actually contacted Zabel about comparing notes, but Zabel ignored it. A couple of weeks later, though, he was in the area of this private investigator, so he dropped by the house only to find out that he had gone into hospice. But his sister was there and told him, "Help yourself to any files," and sure enough, he found a file with his name on it. And after going through the notes, the son of a bitch did crack the case. There was an alibi that didn't match up. The private investigator caught it, Zabel missed it, and he's been beating himself up over it ever since. Mare asks him why didn't he admit that he didn't crack the case, and he says, "I don't know. I guess I just felt like I wanted to do something great." To make him feel better, she tells him how she hid drugs on her grandson's mother, and that's why she's on leave. This does actually make him feel better. But then he gets a phone call letting him know that there are 7 vans that match that description. Right before they head off to start knocking on some doors, Zabel leans in and kisses Mare and then says, "How do you know what I want?" And then he's ready to go knock on some doors. And it takes a little bit, but they finally get to a conversion van that is in front of Benny's Tavern. And the guy that lives in the place is named Mr. Potts. They ask to step inside the house where he is blasting music. They ask him to turn it down and he goes to shut the music off, although you can tell he is concerned about what they might hear. And that's when Zabel sees a pack of Winstons on the table. And that was an identifying mark that the prostitutes gave both of them on the perp. So at this point, they're pretty sure they have their guy. When the music shuts off, though, both girls in the attic can tell that something's up because he has guests and he wasn't expecting them. So they start shaking the pipe to try to alert whoever is there that there's people in the house. At first, Potts tries to act like it's a broken radiator, but the banging continues, and that's when Mare notices that there are security cameras there. She asks, "What are the cameras for?" And he says, "Well, my uncle installed them for the bar in the back." She then asks, "Do you live alone?" And he says, "Yeah, I do." But the banging is getting louder and louder. And that's when they start hearing somebody yelling for help. Zabel goes to grab his gun, but Potts had a gun behind his back, and he grabs it and shoots Zabel right in the head. He goes to shoot Mare, and he isn't able to hit her, but her hand is pretty badly injured. And she's kind of locked in the house. She has nowhere to go but up. She finds the room with the girls and tells them that she'll be back for them. Mare then texts the police to show up at the residence ASAP, and then finds a nook in the house to hide in the attic. When Potts shows up in that room, she bum rushes him, hitting him with a frying pan and trying to get away. Well, Potts is quick on her ass. Mare is able to make it to the kitchen and grab Zabel's gun and shoot Potts, killing him. And that's when the cops finally arrive. They rush into the house and are asking if anyone's there, but Mare is still in shock. Thanks for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to this channel. Like the video if you liked it. Hit thumbs down if you don't. Be nice in the comments section. Nasty comments hurt my feelings. I work hard on these. If I make a mistake, it happens. If you don't see the next video up in the end screen, it'll be up soon. Sharing is caring. Put it on your MySpace page or your away message. And check out my podcast, Scene Invaders, wherever you listen to podcasts.